The champagne bubbles caught the light from the crystal chandeliers above, each tiny sphere reflecting fractured versions of the room, distorted faces, glittering jewelry, expensive smiles that never quite reached anyone's eyes. I watched them rise in my untouched glass, thinking how perfectly they represented this entire evening. Beautiful, effervescent, and utterly empty. Lorenzo's hand rested on the small of my back, a gesture that once sent warmth through my entire body. Now it felt like a brand of ownership, present but disconnected, the way you'd touch a piece of furniture while talking to someone more interesting. He wasn't looking at me. He hadn't looked at me, really looked at me, in months. Mr. Vitali, we were just discussing the waterfront expansion, a man in a navy suit said, his cologne so aggressive it made my eyes water. I'd learned to identify the different scents of Lorenzo's business associates by now. This one smelled like cedar and desperation, probably trying too hard to impress. Your input would be invaluable. Lorenzo's fingers tightened slightly against my back. Not affection, just acknowledgement that I existed as an accessory to be repositioned. Elena, Cara, would you excuse me for a moment? Cara, dear. The Italian endearment had once made my heart flutter. Now it was just a verbal tick, as automatic and meaningless as a cough. I smiled the way I'd perfected over 3 years of marriage. Lips curved, eyes distant. The expression of a woman who'd learned that protest only prolonged the inevitable. Of course, I said, my voice carrying none of the exhaustion that had settled into my bones like sediment. He drifted away into the cluster of dark suits and calculated laughter, leaving me standing near the bar with my untouched champagne and the familiar weight of invisibility. The Castellano Gallery had been transformed for tonight's charity gala. My former colleagues had outdone themselves with the installation, creating an immersive experience that merged classical art with contemporary pieces. I'd helped plan events like this once, back when I was Elena Santori, art curator with a passion for bringing beauty into the world. Now I was Elena Vitali, wife of Lorenzo Vitali, and my primary role was to stand beautifully silent while he conducted business that I was never quite important enough to know the details of. I set the champagne glass down on a passing waiter's tray and moved toward the windows overlooking the city. November in New York meant early darkness, the kind that swallowed the afternoon whole and left you wondering where the day had gone. The glass was cold against my palm when I pressed it there, trying to ground myself in something physical, something real. My reflection stared back at me, a woman in a midnight blue Valentino gown that Lorenzo's assistant had selected, diamond earrings that had been his grandmother's, hair swept up in an elegant twist that a professional had spent an hour creating. I looked like success. I looked like someone who had everything. I looked like a lie. Mrs. Vitali, the exhibition is magnificent, someone said beside me. I turned to find Gabriella Russo, one of my former colleagues from my curatorial days. Her smile was genuine, her eyes warm with recognition of who I used to be. I heard you consulted on the layout. Just some suggestions, I demurred, though I'd spent 3 weeks working with the team before Lorenzo had decided my involvement was unnecessary given his schedule. Translation: he needed me available for last-minute business dinners and couldn't have me committed to actual work that might conflict with his convenience. Your eye for spatial dynamics hasn't diminished, Gabriella said softly, and something in her tone made me wonder if she saw through the careful facade I maintained. The way you positioned the Caravaggio against the modern pieces, it's brilliant. You always had a gift for seeing how things connected. The compliment shouldn't have made my throat tight, but it did. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen for something other than my relationship to Lorenzo. Elena. His voice cut through the moment like a blade. I turned to find him approaching with that particular set to his jaw that meant annoyance restrained for public consumption. We need to leave. Something's come up. No apology to Gabriella for the interruption. No acknowledgement that I might be in the middle of a conversation. Just the assumption that his needs superseded everything else, the way they always did. "I'll get my coat," I said quietly. Actually, Lorenzo's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out with the kind of immediate attention he never gave me. His expression shifted as he read the screen. Calculation, concern, the look of a man weighing options that didn't include consulting his wife. "Change of plans. I need to handle this. You take the car home. I'll catch a ride with Marco." The dismissal was so casual, so practiced, that I almost didn't react. Almost. But something in me, some final thread of self-respect that hadn't yet frayed completely, pulled taut. "Lorenzo," I said, keeping my voice low. "We came together. We can leave together. Whatever it is can wait 30 minutes. His eyes finally focused on me, really focused, and what I saw there wasn't love or even irritation. It was indifference masquerading as patience, the look you'd give a child who didn't understand how important grown-up matters were. "Elena, don't be difficult. This is important business." "And I'm your wife," I said, hating how small my voice sounded, how much I'd shrunk myself over the years to fit into the spaces he allowed me. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that I was pushing back at all. Then his jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and he leaned in close enough that only I could hear the words that would later replay in my mind like a recording I couldn't stop. "Then walk home if you need the company so badly. Dio, Elena, you're acting like I'm abandoning you. Grow up." The words landed like physical blows. Around us, the gala continued. Beautiful people in beautiful clothes celebrating beautiful things. No one noticed the small death occurring near the window, the moment when something essential finally broke beyond repair. "Fine," I heard myself say. The word came from somewhere distant, somewhere cold and clear. "I'll walk." For a fraction of a second, his expression shifted. Uncertainty, perhaps. A flash of recognition that he'd crossed a line. But his phone buzzed again, and the moment passed. He squeezed my shoulder once, a gesture that might have looked affectionate to anyone watching. And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd of men whose business was always more important than the woman waiting at home. I stood there for a moment, feeling the imprint of his fingers on my shoulder like fingerprints on glass. Gabriella had drifted away, reading the moment correctly. The gallery hummed with conversation and laughter, none of it including me. I retrieved my coat from the check, a Burberry trench that Lorenzo had bought for my birthday last year, back when gifts could still sometimes feel like affection instead of appeasement. The November air hit me like a judgment when I stepped outside, cold and sharp and unforgiving. The gallery was in Chelsea. My apartment, our apartment, was in Tribeca. Approximately 2 miles through Manhattan streets that were busy enough to feel safe, empty enough to feel abandoned. I'd walked further before. I'd walked through worse weather. What I hadn't done was walk away from my marriage with such absolute clarity of purpose. My heels clicked against the sidewalk, a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Each step took me further from the warmth of the gallery, further from the illusion of the life I'd been trying to maintain. The city moved around me with its usual indifference. Taxis rushing past, couples walking arm in arm, delivery drivers dodging through traffic. I thought about Lorenzo's face when he told me to grow up, about the casual cruelty in his dismissal, about the 1,000 small cuts that had led to this moment, each one insignificant enough to excuse, substantial enough to scar. The light at the intersection of West 20th and 10th Avenue turned green. I stepped off the curb, my mind still replaying the evening, still cataloging the ways I'd failed to matter. I didn't see the car. The sound came first, rubber squealing against asphalt, someone shouting, that particular tone of warning that makes your body move before your brain processes why. I turned my head, saw headlights rushing toward me like twin accusations. Tried to move back, but my heel caught on something. The impact was less dramatic than movies make it seem. No explosion of glass or dramatic flip through the air. Just a brutal collision that sent me spinning, my shoulder taking the brunt as I hit the ground, my head cracking against the pavement with a sound that seemed very far away. And then there was only pain, sharp and absolute in my shoulder, radiating down my side, pulsing in my skull. I tried to breathe and felt something wrong in my ribs, something that made each inhalation a negotiation with agony. Voices surrounded me. Hands touched me. Someone was calling 911. Someone else was saying Jesus Christ over and over like a prayer or a curse. "Don't move her," a voice commanded. "Ambulance is coming." "Miss, can you hear me? Keep your eyes open." I could hear. I could see the night sky above me, stars obscured by city lights and my own tears. I could feel the cold concrete beneath me and the warm wetness that might have been blood spreading through my hair. And then I heard another voice, familiar, frantic, destroyed. "Elena, Dio mio, Elena, no, no, no." Lorenzo's hands cradled my face, careful not to move me but unable not to touch me. "Amore mio, stay with me. Look at me. I'm here. I'm right here." I looked at him through the haze of pain and shock, and the clarity that had started in the gallery bloomed into something absolute. His face was white, his eyes wild with fear, his perfectly styled hair disheveled from running. He was devastated, terrified, breaking apart in real time. And all I could think was, it took this. It took me lying broken on the street for him to see me, really see me. The ambulance arrived in a symphony of sirens and lights. Paramedics moved me onto a board with practiced efficiency, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through my body. Lorenzo tried to climb in with me, his hand reaching for mine, his voice pleading. "Sir, you'll have to follow in your own vehicle," a paramedic said firmly. "She's my wife," Lorenzo insisted, his accent thickening with emotion, the way it always did under stress. "I'm not leaving her." "Sir," Lorenzo, my voice came out broken, barely audible over the chaos. But he heard it. He went still, his face hovering above mine in the back of the ambulance, waiting for whatever I was going to say. "Go home," I whispered. The paramedic closed the doors before I could see his reaction. But I didn't need to see it. I'd seen everything I needed to see in the moment he told me to walk, to grow up, to stop being so difficult when all I'd asked for was 30 minutes of his time. As the ambulance carried me through the city streets, each bump a fresh negotiation with pain, I made a promise to myself. I would survive this. I would heal. And I would never, ever let him make me feel invisible again. The hospital lights were different from the gallery chandeliers, fluorescent and unforgiving, casting everything in the harsh clarity of truth. They made the white walls look sterile and cold, made the monitors beep out their mechanical rhythms, made it impossible to hide in the soft focus of dim lighting and champagne bubbles. My shoulder was broken. 3 ribs were fractured. I had a concussion that made the room tilt whenever I moved too quickly. The doctor, a tired woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, had explained it all in careful detail while Lorenzo stood in the corner, his expensive suit rumpled, his face haggard with guilt. "You're lucky," she'd said, and I'd almost laughed at the word. Lucky. As if luck had anything to do with being told to walk home alone, with stepping into traffic because my mind was elsewhere, with learning that your husband only truly sees you when you're broken on the ground. That had been 4 hours ago. Now it was almost 3 in the morning, and Lorenzo hadn't left. He'd pulled the uncomfortable hospital chair as close to my bed as possible, his hand resting near mine without quite touching, as if he'd finally learned that physical proximity wasn't the same as emotional connection. "Elena," he said for the 100th time, his voice rough from crying and apologizing and trying to explain away 3 years of neglect in a single night. "Amore, please, talk to me." I stared at the ceiling, counting the acoustic tiles because it was easier than looking at him. 23 across, 16 down. 368 perfect squares, each one exactly like the others, creating a pattern that made sense in a way my marriage never had. "The doctor said I can go home tomorrow," I said finally, my voice flat and distant. "If there are no complications." "Our home," he said quickly, leaning forward in the chair. "You'll come home and I'll take care of you. I'll work from the apartment. You're home," I corrected gently. "I'll be staying somewhere else during recovery." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the nurses stationed down the hall, could hear the elevator dinging, could hear Lorenzo's sharp intake of breath that sounded like a wound. "What are you saying?" His hand finally moved to touch mine, and I pulled away before he could make contact. The movement sent pain shooting through my shoulder, but it was worth it to see him finally understand what rejection felt like. "I'm saying," I spoke slowly, carefully, each word chosen with the precision I used to use when curating an exhibition, "that I need space, that I need time, that I need to not be in a place where every room reminds me of how invisible I've become." "You're not invisible," he protested, standing now, pacing in the small space like a caged animal. "Dio mio, Elena, you're everything. You're my wife. I'm the woman you told to walk home alone at midnight in Manhattan." The words came out sharper than I intended, edged with all the pain that had nothing to do with broken bones. "I'm the woman whose company was so worthless to you that you literally suggested I trek 2 miles through the city rather than spend 30 minutes in a car with me." He stopped pacing, his back to me, his shoulders hunched in a way I'd never seen before. Lorenzo Vitali, who moved through the world with the confidence of a man who always knew he was the most dangerous person in any room, suddenly looked small. "I didn't think," he said, his voice breaking. "I wasn't thinking. The call was from Marco about the shipment issue, and I defaulted to work mode. I didn't mean—" "You never mean to," I interrupted. "You never mean to cancel our anniversary dinner. You never mean to forget my birthday. You never mean to spend every evening on your phone while I sit across from you trying to remember what we used to talk about before your business consumed everything." He turned then, and the devastation in his face was so complete, so genuine, that some part of me, the part that had loved him desperately once, ached in response. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Tell me how to fix this," he begged. "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. I'll change. I'll be better. Lorenzo." I said his name like a period at the end of a sentence, final and absolute. "You can't fix this tonight. You can't fix it with promises or panic or guilt. You can't fix 3 years of making me feel like an afterthought with 1 night of fear, because you almost lost me." "But I am losing you," he said, the words raw and desperate. "I can feel it. You're slipping away, and I don't know how to hold on." "Then let go," I whispered. "Let me go." The monitors beeped their steady rhythm, measuring heartbeats and oxygen levels, quantifying the ways my body was functioning even as everything else fell apart. A nurse poked her head in, took in the scene, the crying man, the emotionless patient, and retreated without comment. "I can't," Lorenzo said simply. "You're asking me to cut out my own heart." "No," I corrected, turning my head to finally look at him directly, ignoring the way the movement made the room spin. "I'm asking you to understand that you already did that to me. Slowly. Over 3 years of being second place to business calls and late-night meetings and associates who always seemed more important than the woman who promised to love you forever." He moved toward me then, dropping to his knees beside the bed in a gesture so Italian, so dramatic, so quintessentially Lorenzo that I almost smiled. "Almost. I love you," he said, his hand hovering over mine, not quite touching, finally learning the lesson of unwanted contact. "I've loved you since the moment you walked into that gallery opening wearing that ridiculous purple dress and told me my tie was an insult to color theory." I remembered that night. 4 years ago, when I was still Elena Santori, confident and sharp-tongued, unafraid to tell a handsome stranger that his fashion choices were questionable. He'd laughed, charmed by my boldness, and asked me to help him pick out a better one. We'd spent 3 hours in that gallery, arguing about art and aesthetics and the nature of beauty, and by the end, I was half in love with his sharp mind and crooked smile. That Lorenzo felt like a ghost now, a memory of a man who'd been swallowed by the weight of his business, his obligations, his empire. "I loved you too," I said quietly. Past tense, past life, past version of us that doesn't exist anymore. "Then we'll find it again," he insisted, his voice thick with determination. "We'll go back to that gallery. Start over. Rebuild." "You can't rebuild on a broken foundation, Lorenzo. You taught me that. Remember? When you bought that warehouse in Red Hook and had to completely tear it down because the structure was compromised? You said trying to fix it would cost more than starting fresh." He flinched at his own words being used against him. "This is different. This is us. This is exactly the same," I said, exhaustion finally winning over the adrenaline that had kept me upright through this conversation. "Our foundation is compromised, and I need to figure out if I have the strength to start fresh." The door opened again, and this time the nurse was insistent. "Mr. Vitali, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Mrs. Vitali needs rest, and visiting hours ended 3 hours ago. We made an exception given the circumstances, but—" "5 more minutes," Lorenzo pleaded, looking at the nurse with desperation that would have been compelling if I hadn't seen him use the same intensity to negotiate business deals. "Sir, it's fine," I interrupted. "He can go. I'm tired anyway." Lorenzo stood slowly, like an old man, like someone who'd aged decades in a single night. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting a business card and writing something on the back. "The number for my private driver," he said, placing it on the bedside table. "Anytime, day or night. If you need anything at all, he'll bring it to you. And this," he wrote another number, "is my personal cell, not the business line. The one only Marco and my mother have. It's always on. I'll always answer." I didn't pick up the card, didn't acknowledge the gesture, just stared at the ceiling tiles and counted squares until I heard his footsteps retreating, until I heard the door close softly behind him. Only then did I allow the tears to come, silent and hot, sliding down my temples into my hair, released by pain and medication, and the terrible relief of finally saying what I'd held inside for too long. The next morning brought paperwork and discharge instructions, and a prescription for pain medication that would make the next few weeks bearable. It also brought my phone, which had been recovered from the accident scene and was now full of missed calls and messages. 47 from Lorenzo, 15 from Marco, his right-hand man, 8 from his mother, Caterina, and 1 from a number I hadn't seen in months. My former roommate, Sophia, who'd moved to Brooklyn and started a restoration studio. I called Sophia first. "Elena?" Her voice was thick with sleep, alarm replacing grogginess quickly. "Dio mio, I saw the news this morning. They said there was an accident in Chelsea last night, and I thought, are you okay? Where are you?" "Hospital," I said, my voice rough from disuse and crying. "But I'm being discharged today. Sophia, I need a favor." "Anything, name it." "Do you still have that spare room above your studio? The one you were going to rent out?" Silence. Then carefully, "Yes, but Elena, shouldn't you be going home? Lorenzo must be—" "I can't go back there," I interrupted. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I just need somewhere quiet to heal. somewhere that's mine. Come here, she said immediately, understanding in a way that only old friends could. Come home to us, for however long you need. I closed my eyes, feeling something like hope flickering in the wreckage. Thank you. When the nurse wheeled me out to the hospital entrance, I half expected Lorenzo to be waiting, but he wasn't. Just a black town car with tinted windows and a driver holding a sign with my name. Lorenzo's private driver, the one he'd promised would always be available. I almost laughed at the irony. Even now, even in his absence, he was trying to take care of me in the only way he knew how, through money and resources and the trappings of his power. I gave the driver Sophia's address in Brooklyn. He didn't ask questions, didn't comment on the fact that it wasn't the Tribeca apartment, just nodded and opened the door, helping me in with careful hands that were mindful of my injuries. As we drove through the city, past the gallery where everything had broken, past the intersection where I'd been hit, I felt something settling in my chest. Not peace. It was too soon for that. But a kind of quiet resolve. I was 28 years old. I was injured, but alive. I had friends who loved me, a career I'd abandoned that might still have a place for me, and a husband who'd finally learned, too late, what it felt like to be the one left behind. The driver's phone rang through the car's Bluetooth system. Lorenzo's name flashed on the screen. Sir, the driver answered. Did she get in the car? Lorenzo's voice filled the space, rough and desperate. Is she safe? Yes, sir. We're en route now. Tell her. Lorenzo stopped, the silence heavy. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I'll wait. Tell her I'll do better. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a question in his eyes. I shook my head once. There was nothing to tell Lorenzo that I hadn't already said. The time for words was past. Now there was only action, consequence, and the long, difficult work of figuring out who Elena Vitali was when she wasn't defined by being Lorenzo's wife. She heard you, sir, the driver said diplomatically. As we crossed into Brooklyn, leaving Manhattan and Lorenzo, and 3 years of slow dissolution behind, I pressed my hand carefully against my broken shoulder and felt, for the first time in years, like I was moving toward something instead of being slowly pulled under. Sophia's restoration studio occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in Greenpoint, the kind of Brooklyn neighborhood that had been rough 30 years ago and was now gentrifying so fast you could watch the change happen in real time. The spare room above it was accessed by an external staircase, wrought iron that rang under my feet as the driver helped me up, each step a negotiation between my injured ribs and my desperate need for independence. The room was exactly what I needed. Small, clean, flooded with northern light from industrial windows that overlooked the East River. A bed, a dresser, a kitchenette that was really just a hot plate and a sink. No history, no ghosts, no memories of being slowly erased. It's perfect, I told Sophia, who hovered anxiously as I lowered myself onto the bed with a gasp that I tried to swallow. It's a shoebox, she corrected, her dark curls escaping from the messy bun she always wore when working. But it's yours for as long as you need it. No rent, no questions, no... I'll pay rent, I interrupted. I'm not a charity case. Elena, I need to do this myself, I said, hearing the edge in my voice and trying to soften it. Please, let me do something myself. She studied me for a long moment, her artist's eyes seeing too much, then nodded. We'll figure it out. For now, rest. I'll bring soup later. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. The messages from Lorenzo had stopped, not because he'd given up, but because he'd switched tactics. Now the messages came from his mother. Elena, figlia mia. Lorenzo told me what happened. I'm lighting candles for your recovery. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Please don't make hasty decisions while you're in pain. Pain clouds judgment. He's devastated, Elena. I've never seen my son like this, give him a chance to prove he can change. I deleted them all without responding. Katerina Vitali was a force of nature. Warm, fierce, infinitely skilled at emotional manipulation, disguised as maternal concern. She'd welcomed me into the family with genuine joy, had taken me to her favorite trattorias, had taught me to make Lorenzo's favorite pasta from scratch. But her loyalty would always belong to her son first. The pain medication made my thoughts fuzzy, made the afternoon bleed into evening without clear boundaries. I slept fitfully, waking to the sound of boats on the river, to the distant rumble of the subway, to Sophia climbing the stairs with promised soup, and a look that said she wanted to ask 1,000 questions but wouldn't. 3 days passed in that hazy rhythm. Sleep, medication, small movements around the room that left me breathless. Sophia checked on me regularly, but gave me space, understanding what I needed even when I couldn't articulate it myself. On the 4th day, I woke feeling clearer. The pain was still there, but had dulled to something manageable, something that didn't consume all my attention. I showered carefully, avoiding getting the dressing on my shoulder wet, and looked at my reflection in the small mirror above the sink. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, paler, thinner, purple bruises blooming across her collarbone like grotesque flowers, but her eyes were focused in a way they hadn't been in years. I was sitting by the window, watching tugboats guide a container ship down the river, when the nausea hit. It came in a wave so sudden and absolute that I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting up the tea and toast Sophia had brought earlier. When it passed, I sat on the cold tile floor, my forehead pressed against the wall, wondering if it was the pain medication or stress or... The thought crystallized slowly, reluctantly, like ice forming on water. When was my last period? I counted back through the haze of hospital days and accident trauma and pre-accident numbness. 6 weeks. Maybe 7. I'd been so consumed with trying to salvage my marriage that I hadn't noticed. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and ordered a pregnancy test from a pharmacy that promised delivery within an hour. Then I sat on the bathroom floor and cried, not from pain or fear or grief, but from the sheer cosmic irony of it all. The universe had a wicked sense of timing. The test was positive. Both tests. All 3 tests I'd had them send because I couldn't believe it the first time, the second time, even the 3rd time when the lines appeared with damning clarity. I was pregnant with Lorenzo Vitali's child. I'd spent 3 years trying to get pregnant, back when I still believed a baby might bring us closer, might remind Lorenzo of why he'd fallen in love with me. We'd stopped trying about a year ago, not because we'd officially decided to, but because intimate moments had become so rare that prevention seemed unnecessary. And now, when I'd finally found the courage to leave, to draw a line in the sand and say enough. Now, when I was sitting in a spare room above a restoration studio, counting bruises and broken bones and trying to figure out who I was without him. Now there was a cluster of cells dividing inside me, oblivious to the wreckage of my marriage, to the impossibility of its timing, to the way it changed everything and nothing simultaneously. I called Lorenzo, not because I wanted to, but because he deserved to know, and because putting it off would only make it harder. He answered before the first ring finished. Elena. Dio mio. Elena. Are you okay? Are you hurt? Do you need... I'm pregnant, I said, cutting through his panic. The words landed in the silence like stones dropped in still water. I heard his breath catch, heard the rustle of fabric as he moved, sitting down probably, or standing up, something physical to anchor himself. When he spoke again, his voice was raw with emotion. I couldn't quite parse. Pregnant. I'm pregnant, I repeated. About 7 weeks, I think. I took 3 tests. They're all positive. Are you... He stopped, started again. How are you feeling? Is the baby okay? The accident, did the doctors— I didn't know when I was in the hospital, I said, but I'll make an appointment. Get checked. Make sure everything's fine. I'll come with you, he said immediately. To the appointment. I'll cancel everything. Lorenzo. I said his name like a stop sign. I'm telling you because you have a right to know. But this doesn't change what I said in the hospital. This doesn't fix us. It's our child, Elena. Our baby. How can that not change? Because a baby isn't a Band-Aid, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. A baby isn't a solution to a broken marriage. It's a human being who deserves parents who can coexist in the same room without one of them feeling invisible. You were never invisible, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction now. We both knew it was a lie. I'm keeping the baby, I said, needing to establish this before he could make it into a negotiation. And you can be as involved as you want to be, as a father. But Lorenzo, listen to me carefully. I will let you be a father to this child. I will never let you be my husband again. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, never, I confirmed, and saying it felt like releasing something I'd been holding too tightly for too long. We're done, Lorenzo. The marriage is over. But we're going to be parents, and we're going to have to figure out how to do that without being together. I can't accept that, he said, but there was desperation rather than authority in his tone. I won't. Elena, I love you. I've always loved you. I got lost. I let the business consume me. I forgot what mattered most. But I'm remembering now. I'm changing. You're changing because you're scared, I interrupted. You're changing because I left, because I almost died, because suddenly I'm not a guarantee anymore. But Lorenzo, real change doesn't happen in crisis. Real change happens in the boring moments. In the Tuesday evenings and the lazy Sunday mornings and all the unremarkable days when there's no drama to force your attention. Then give me those days, he begged. Give me a chance to prove it. Move back home. Let me take care of you during the pregnancy. Let me show you I can be different. I looked out the window at the river, at the city glittering across the water, at the life I was trying to build from the ruins of my marriage. I need to do this on my own first. I need to remember who Elena Santori was before she became Elena Vitali and forgot herself in the process. And the baby. His voice broke on the word. The baby deserves a father who shows up, who doesn't miss appointments because of business calls, who doesn't make promises he can't keep. I paused, then added more gently, I believe you want to be that person, Lorenzo. I really do, but wanting and doing are different things. I'll prove it, he said fiercely. I'll prove I can be that father, that husband, that man you fell in love with. Don't do it for me, I said quietly. Do it for yourself, and for the baby, because I'm already gone, Lorenzo. I left the moment you told me to walk home. I gestured to my bruised body even though he couldn't see it, just made it official. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and placed my hand over my still flat stomach. Inside me, something impossible was forming. A life that would connect me to Lorenzo forever, even as I tried to sever all other ties. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 3 years trying to create this exact situation, believing a child would fix us, would remind him to love me. And now that it had finally happened, I knew with absolute certainty that a baby wouldn't save our marriage. But maybe, it would force Lorenzo to finally become the person he'd always claimed to be. And maybe it would force me to become the person I'd forgotten how to be. A woman who knew her own worth, who wouldn't settle for crumbs of attention, who could stand on her own 2 feet even when those feet were unsteady with injury and pregnancy. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Coming up with dinner. No nausea-inducing smells. I promise. I smiled despite everything. This was what I needed. Friends who knew me, who had known me before Lorenzo, who remembered Elena Santori, the art curator with strong opinions and stronger boundaries. That woman had gotten lost somewhere in 3 years of trying to make herself smaller, quieter, more convenient. But she was still there, underneath the bruises and broken bones and complicated pregnancy. And I was going to find her again. Even if it meant walking through the darkness alone, I was finally moving toward my own light. The first ultrasound appointment was scheduled for a cold December morning, exactly 2 weeks after I'd taken those 3 damning pregnancy tests. I'd agonized over whether to tell Lorenzo the date and time, finally deciding that despite everything, he deserved to be there for this. He arrived at the clinic 15 minutes early. I knew because I watched from the window of the waiting room as his car pulled up. Not the usual Blacktown car, but a silver SUV that looked practical and normal and utterly unlike him. He emerged wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual suits, looking somehow both less intimidating and more vulnerable. When he walked into the waiting room and saw me, everything in his face rearranged itself around relief and longing and careful restraint. He'd learned, in these 2 weeks of me not answering most of his calls, that overwhelming me with emotion only pushed me further away. "Elena," he said softly, sitting in the chair beside me but leaving space between us. "Thank you for letting me come." "It's your baby too," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I'd practiced this, the tone that was neither warm nor cold, that established boundaries without being cruel. "How are you feeling? The nausea, is it—" "Manageable," I interrupted. "Sophia's been making me ginger tea. It helps." The mention of Sophia made his jaw tighten slightly. Not anger, but the recognition that someone else was taking care of me, filling the role he'd abdicated. But he didn't comment, didn't try to insert himself. Just nodded and looked down at his hands. We sat in silence until the nurse called my name. Lorenzo stood when I did, his hand hovering near my elbow without quite touching, a gesture of support that respected my need for space. The ultrasound room was warm and dark, lit only by the glow of the monitor. The technician, a cheerful woman in her 50s with kind eyes, helped me lie back on the exam table and rolled up my shirt to expose my stomach. "Okay, this will be cold," she warned, squeezing gel onto my abdomen. The sensor pressed against my skin, and the room filled with a sound like ocean waves. Rhythmic, insistent, impossible. "There," the technician said, pointing to a flickering spot on the screen. "That's your baby's heartbeat." I stared at the grainy black and white image, at the tiny bean-shaped shadow that was somehow, impossibly, a person. A life. A future I hadn't planned but was now responsible for. "It's so small," I whispered. "About the size of a blueberry right now," the technician said with a smile. "But growing every day. Based on these measurements, I'd say you're about 8 weeks along. Everything looks good. Heartbeat is strong. Development is right on track." I felt Lorenzo's hand find mine, his fingers interlacing with mine with a certainty I hadn't felt from him in years. This time, I didn't pull away. Not because I'd forgiven him or changed my mind, but because in this moment, looking at the life we'd created together, I could acknowledge what we'd been to each other before everything fell apart. "Can you print an image?" Lorenzo asked, his voice thick with emotion. The technician smiled and pressed a button. "Of course." After the appointment, we stood on the sidewalk outside the clinic, the winter air biting at exposed skin. Lorenzo held the ultrasound image like it was something sacred, his thumb tracing the edge of the paper. "Elena," he said finally, "I know you meant what you said. About us being over. But this baby, he gestured to the image. This baby needs stability, a home, both parents. The baby will have both parents, I said firmly. Just not married ones. Plenty of children have co-parents who aren't together. It's not ideal, but it's better than growing up watching their parents destroy each other slowly. Is that what we were doing? He asked, looking at me with those dark eyes that had once made my heart race. Destroying each other? You were destroying me, I corrected gently. I don't think you meant to. I don't think you even realized you were doing it. But Lorenzo, every time you chose a phone call over a conversation, every time you canceled plans for business, every time you made me feel like I was competing for last place in your priority list, it was another small death. He flinched like I'd struck him. I thought I was building something for us. The business, the money, the security. I thought if I could just make everything perfect. I didn't need perfect, I interrupted. I needed present. I needed you to look at me the way you looked at your phone. I needed to matter as much as your next deal. You mattered more, he insisted. You matter more than anything. I didn't know how to show it. My father, he taught me that providing was love, that building an empire for your family was how you proved devotion. I thought, your father was wrong, I said, not unkindly. Or maybe he was right for his time, for his marriage. But I didn't need an empire, Lorenzo. I needed a partner. He was quiet for a long moment, studying the ultrasound image like it held answers we couldn't articulate. What if I learned? What if I proved I could be that partner? Then you'd be a better father, I said. And maybe, eventually, a friend. But not a husband. Not again. Why not? The question was almost plaintive. If I change, if I become the man you needed all along, why couldn't we? Because I can't spend my life waiting to see if the change is real, I said. The words harder than I intended, but true nonetheless. Because I'm exhausted, Lorenzo. I'm tired of auditioning for your attention. I'm tired of wondering if this time will be different. I'm tired of being the one who adapts and accommodates and shrinks herself to fit into the spaces you leave available. I don't want you to shrink, he said desperately. I want you to take up all the space. I want you to be so present in my life that I can't ignore you even if I tried. Then do that for the baby, I said, placing my hand over my stomach. Be so present in this child's life that absence isn't an option. Prove you can show up consistently, not just in crisis, but in mundane moments. Do that for a year, for 2 years, and maybe we can have a real conversation about what's possible between us. A year, he repeated, as if testing the weight of that much time. You want me to wait a year before we even discuss reconciliation? I want you to stop thinking about reconciliation, I corrected. I want you to think about being a father, about showing up for doctor's appointments and helping pick out cribs and learning how to change diapers. I want you to prove that when this baby cries at 3 a.m., you'll be there, not sending your driver, not having your assistant handle it, but actually physically present. Something shifted in his expression, determination replacing desperation. I can do that. I will do that. Then do it, I said simply. Not for me, for them. I gestured to the ultrasound image. Do it because a child deserves more than I got. We stood in silence, the city moving around us with indifferent rhythm. Finally, Lorenzo carefully folded the ultrasound image and put it in his wallet, the gesture somehow both tender and heartbreaking. Can I at least help financially? He asked. The medical expenses, the apartment. Sophia's place is too small for you and a baby. Let me find you somewhere better, somewhere safe. I'm not taking your money, Lorenzo. It's not my money, he countered. It's our child's future. Let me provide that much. Please. I wanted to refuse on principle, wanted to prove I could do this completely alone. But practicality warred with pride, and practicality won. Fine. Medical expenses only. And Lorenzo... I paused, making sure he was really hearing me. If you want to help find an apartment, you find me options, but I make the final choice. And your name doesn't go on the lease. This is my space, not ours. Deal. He agreed quickly. Then, more hesitantly, can I call you? Not every day if you don't want, but regularly. Check in on how you're feeling. Make sure you're okay. Once a week, I said. You can call once a week. And Lorenzo, the calls need to be short. 10 minutes maximum. I can't handle the emotional intensity of longer conversations right now. He nodded, accepting the limits I was setting, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't seen in years. Respect for my boundaries. Not agreement necessarily, but acknowledgement that my needs mattered as much as his wants. 3 weeks later, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Carroll Gardens that Lorenzo's real estate contact had found. It was small but bright, with hardwood floors and a tiny balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. The rent was reasonable enough that I could afford it with the freelance consulting work I'd started taking on from galleries and private collectors. Lorenzo had wanted to furnish it for me, but I'd refused. The only things I accepted were a crib, still in its box, waiting for assembly, and a glider chair for nursing that his mother had insisted on buying. Sophia helped me move in, her arms full of plants and paintings that made the bare walls feel less lonely. "You're really doing this," she said, looking around the empty space with something like awe, starting over completely. "I don't have a choice," I replied, unpacking the few belongings I'd accumulated in the past month. "I'm going to be someone's mother in 7 months. I need to remember how to be a whole person first." "And Lorenzo?" I shrugged carefully. My shoulder still ached in cold weather, a permanent reminder of that night. Lorenzo's learning how to be a father. We'll see if he can sustain it beyond the initial guilt and panic. But even as I said it, I noticed small changes in our weekly phone calls. He asked about my symptoms without being overbearing, sent links to parenting articles without mansplaining them, showed up to the second ultrasound appointment on time, and stayed quiet during the exam, his hand finding mine only at the moment when we heard the heartbeat again. He was trying, genuinely, consistently trying. It didn't change my decision, didn't make me want to go back. But it made me believe that maybe, eventually, we could build something new from the ashes of what we'd been. Not a marriage, not romance, but a functional partnership centered around the tiny life that kept growing inside me, oblivious to all the complicated history that preceded it. Spring arrived in Brooklyn with sudden insistence. Trees exploding into green overnight, temperature swinging from winter to summer, without the courtesy of gradual transition. I was 5 months pregnant now. My body undeniably changed, my belly round and obvious beneath the loose dresses I'd taken to wearing. The baby kicked constantly, little flutters that grew stronger each day, reminding me that this was real. This was happening. This small human would be here whether I felt ready or not. Lorenzo called every Wednesday at 7 p.m. exactly. True to his word, he kept the conversation short, 10 minutes discussing my symptoms, upcoming appointments, practical concerns about preparation. No mentions of us, no attempts to negotiate reconciliation, just the careful attention of a man learning to be a father from a distance. He'd started attending parenting classes. I only knew this because he'd accidentally pocket-dialed me during one session, and I'd heard the instructor explaining diaper-changing techniques while Lorenzo asked surprisingly thoughtful questions. I'd hung up before he noticed, but something about the overheard conversation had softened something in my chest. He was trying. Really trying. But trying didn't erase 3 years of neglect. Didn't erase that night in Chelsea. Didn't erase the fact that it had taken me almost dying for him to remember I existed. The anatomy scan appointment fell on a rainy Thursday in late April. Lorenzo arrived 10 minutes early again. Punctuality had become his new religion, his way of proving that he could show up reliably. He wore jeans and a navy sweater, had clearly gotten a haircut recently, looked both nervously excited and carefully restrained. "Elena," he greeted me with that same soft tone he'd adopted, the one that acknowledged my boundaries while still conveying warmth. "Ready to find out if we're having a son or daughter?" "I already know," I said, surprising myself with the admission. "I asked them to tell me at the last appointment. I just didn't tell you yet." His face fell slightly, hurt at being excluded, but understanding enough not to protest. "Why not?" "Because I needed it to be mine first," I said honestly. "Something that was just between me and the baby. Does that make sense?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, it makes sense." Then, more hesitantly, "Will you tell me now?" I placed my hand on my belly, feeling a small kick against my palm, like the baby was weighing in on the decision. "It's a boy. We're having a son." Lorenzo's entire face transformed, joy so complete and unguarded that it reminded me painfully of the man I'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. "A son," he repeated, his voice breaking slightly. "A boy." "Dio mio, Elena, we're having a son." "You're having a son," I corrected gently. "I'm growing him. There's a difference." The distinction landed between us, a reminder of the distance we maintained even in these shared moments. But Lorenzo just nodded, accepting the boundary, his hand moving unconsciously toward my belly before stopping himself. "Can I?" He gestured tentatively. "Would you mind if I took his hand and placed it on my stomach where the baby was most active. We stood like that in the clinic waiting room, his palm warm against my belly, his eyes wide with wonder when he felt the kick. "He's strong," Lorenzo said softly. "Already so strong." "Like his father," I said, then added quickly, "physically. Let's hope he gets better emotional intelligence." Lorenzo laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuine, that I found myself smiling despite my determination to maintain distance. "Fair assessment," he admitted. "What about a name? Have you thought about it?" "I've thought about it," I confirmed, "but I'm not ready to share yet. It still feels too new, too vulnerable." "Tell me when you're ready then," he said, removing his hand from my belly with obvious reluctance. "I can wait." The technician called us in before I could respond, and the next 30 minutes were consumed with measurements and images and medical terminology that confirmed what I already knew. The baby was healthy, developing perfectly, blissfully unaware of the complicated circumstances of his conception and impending birth. Afterward, as we stood outside the clinic with rain misting around us, Lorenzo cleared his throat awkwardly. "I've been working with a family lawyer. Drawing up a custody agreement. Financial support arrangements. I wanted to have everything in place before he's born, so there's no confusion, no conflict." I paused, surprised by his foresight. "That's very practical. Thank you." "I also wanted to ask," he continued, "about being at the birth. I know you might not want me there, given everything, but I'd like to be, if you're comfortable with it." I studied his face, the genuine hope in his eyes, the careful way he'd phrased it as a request rather than a demand or assumption. This was the Lorenzo I'd needed 3 years ago, considerate, present, aware that his wants didn't automatically supersede mine. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Ask me again at 8 months. I'll have a better sense of what I need by then." He nodded, respecting the non-answer. "The apartment," he said, shifting topics. "Is it working out? Do you need anything?" "It's good," I confirmed. "Sophia helped me paint the nursery last week. Soft gray with white trim. The crib is finally assembled. I could have done that, he said quickly, if you'd asked. I know how to use tools. I know you do, I replied. But I needed to do it myself. Well, Sophia and I did it together. It took 3 hours and a lot of cursing, but we managed. Something flickered across his face. Not quite jealousy, but close. The recognition that other people were filling roles he'd once occupied. Elena, He stopped, started again. I'm trying very hard to give you space, to respect your boundaries. But it's killing me, knowing you're doing all this alone, knowing I should be there. You weren't there before, I said, not cruelly but factually. When I needed you to care about the mundane daily things that make up a life, you were always somewhere else, always distracted. Why should now be different? Because now I understand what I lost, he said, his voice raw. I understand that those mundane moments were everything, that coming home to you was the best part of my day, and I was too stupid to realize it. That talking about nothing while cooking dinner together was worth more than any business deal. Lorenzo? I know, he interrupted. I know it's too late. I know I don't get to have those moments back. But Elena, please, let me have the new moments. Let me be there for this. For him. He gestured to my belly. Let me prove I can be the father he deserves. You are being that father, I said, and meant it. You're showing up. You're following through. You're learning. That's exactly what I asked you to do. But I want more, he admitted. I want to come home to you at the end of the day. I want to feel him kick at 3 a.m. I want to paint nurseries and assemble cribs and argue about names. He stopped, recognizing he was pushing too hard. I'm sorry. I said I'd respect your boundaries, and here I am trampling them. No, I said quietly. You're being honest. That's not trampling. That's just painful. For both of us. We stood in silence, rain falling harder now, turning the spring afternoon gray and cold. Finally, Lorenzo pulled his keys from his pocket. My car's just around the corner. Let me drive you home. I can take the subway. Elena, per favore. It's raining. You're pregnant, and you're still recovering from being hit by a car 6 months ago. Let me do this one thing. I wanted to refuse on principle, but my shoulder ached in the damp weather, my feet were swollen, and the walk to the subway suddenly felt insurmountable. Okay, I agreed. Thank you. The drive to Carroll Gardens was quiet, punctuated only by the steady rhythm of windshield wipers. When Lorenzo pulled up in front of my building, he put the car in park, but didn't move to let me out. I'm getting married, he said suddenly, the words landing like grenades in the enclosed space. I turned to stare at him, certain I'd misheard. What? Not. Dio, that came out wrong. He ran both hands through his hair, looking more distressed than I'd seen him since the hospital. I'm not getting married. I've been thinking about marriage, about what it means, about how badly I failed at being a husband to you. Lorenzo, let me finish, he said urgently. Please, I've been reading about relationships, about emotional labor and partnership and all the things I somehow never learned growing up with a father who showed love through providing and never through presence. And I've realized... He turned to look at me directly. I've realized that I married you without understanding what marriage meant beyond the ceremony and the ring. I thought it was about grand gestures and financial security. I thought being a good husband meant building an empire for you to live in. It wasn't, I said softly. It wasn't, he agreed. It was about coming home, about being present, about choosing you every day in small ways, instead of occasionally in big ones. And I failed. I failed so completely that I almost killed you through sheer negligence. The car that hit me wasn't your fault, I said. though we both knew that wasn't quite true. "The car was chance," he countered. "But you walking alone through Manhattan at midnight because I couldn't be bothered to spend 30 minutes with you, that was my fault. That will always be my fault." I didn't argue because there was no argument to make. He was right. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he continued. "I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm telling you that I understand now. And if I could go back, if I could do it differently—" His voice broke. "Madonna mia, if I could do it differently." "We can't go back," I said. "We can only move forward." "Then let me move forward as your partner in this," he said. "As the father of your son. As someone who will never again make you feel invisible." "You already are doing that," I reminded him. "You're showing up, Lorenzo. That's what I asked for." "It's not enough," he said. "It will never be enough to make up for what I did, but it's a start." I placed my hand on the door handle, ready to escape the emotional intensity of the car, the conversation, the man beside me who was finally being who I'd always needed him to be. Too late. Always too late. "Lorenzo," I said before getting out. "Thank you for today, for being here, for—" I gestured vaguely, encompassing the appointment, the drive, the raw honesty. "For all of it." "Every Wednesday," he said firmly. "Every appointment, every moment you'll let me be part of. I'll be there, Elena. I promise." I nodded once and stepped out into the rain, feeling his eyes on me as I climbed the steps to my building. When I reached the door and looked back, he was still there, parked at the curb, watching to make sure I got inside safely. It was such a small thing, such a mundane gesture of care. And yet it was exactly what I'd needed 3 years ago. The irony tasted bitter on my tongue as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, one hand on my belly, feeling our son move beneath my palm. Proof that sometimes the thing you wanted most arrives at the moment you've finally learned to stop wanting it. Labor started at 2:17 a.m. on a humid July night, 3 days before my due date. I woke to a contraction that felt like someone had wrapped a steel band around my middle and was systematically tightening it. Then another, building in intensity with terrifying speed. I'd been planning to labor at home for as long as possible, managing through the early stages before heading to the hospital. But my body had other plans, the contractions coming hard and fast with only minutes between them. I called Lorenzo because he'd asked me to, because he'd made me promise during one of our Wednesday calls that I would reach out when labor started regardless of the hour. The phone rang twice before he answered, his voice rough with sleep. "Elena, is it—" "It's time," I said, trying to keep my voice steady through another contraction. "I'm calling an Uber to the hospital. I just wanted you to know." "No Uber," he said, and I heard rustling, rapid movement, the jingle of keys. "I'm already in my car. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Less. Don't move. Don't leave without me." "Lorenzo, I can—" "Please," he interrupted, his voice raw with something between panic and pleading. "Let me do this. Let me be there from the beginning." I wanted to argue that he'd missed the actual beginning, the conception, the first trimester, the months of morning sickness and fatigue and body changes. But another contraction stole my breath, and when it passed, all I could manage was a whispered, "Okay." He made it in 12 minutes. I know because I counted each one while pacing my apartment, breathing through contractions, trying to remember the techniques from the birthing class I'd taken with Sophia. When his knock came at the door, I opened it to find Lorenzo looking simultaneously terrified and determined, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt I'd never seen before, his hair uncombed, his usual polish completely absent. "How far apart?" he asked, taking my overnight bag without waiting for permission. 3 minutes, I said, then doubled over as another contraction hit. His hand found the small of my back, applying pressure exactly where the birthing instructor had demonstrated. I leaned into it without thinking, letting him support me through the wave of pain. "We need to go," he said when I could breathe again. "Now. You're in advanced labor." The drive to the hospital was a blur of contractions and traffic lights, and Lorenzo's steady voice reminding me to breathe, telling me I was doing great, promising that we were almost there. His hand found mine somewhere along the way, our fingers interlacing with the ease of muscle memory from a marriage that officially ended 6 months ago. The hospital staff took one look at me and rushed me to a delivery room. The doctor confirmed what I already knew. I was fully dilated, ready to push. No time for the epidural I'd planned on getting. "Natural childbirth it is," the nurse said cheerfully, as if this was a choice I'd made rather than my body's rebellion against my carefully laid plans. Lorenzo stayed by my head, his hand in mine, his voice in my ear providing a steady stream of encouragement in Italian and English. "Bella, brava, forte, you're so strong, you can do this. Our son is almost here." The pain was unlike anything I'd experienced. Not sharp like the accident, but consuming, all-encompassing. A force that demanded every ounce of my attention and strength. I pushed when they told me to push, breathed when they told me to breathe, existed in a timeless space where nothing existed except the work of bringing my son into the world. And then, after 2 hours that felt like 2 minutes and 2 years simultaneously, there was a cry, high and indignant and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, as if we hadn't known, and placed him on my chest, this small red-faced creature who was mine, ours, more real than anything I'd ever held. I looked down at him through tears I hadn't realized I was crying, at his perfect tiny fingers and nose and mouth. "Hi," I whispered. "Hi, baby. I'm your mama." Beside me, Lorenzo made a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. His hand came to rest on our son's back, so gentle, so reverent, as if afraid he might break this perfect thing we'd made. "He's beautiful," Lorenzo breathed. "Elena, he's perfect." "He is," I agreed, unable to look away from my son's face. The nurses took him briefly for measurements and tests, returning him wrapped in a blue and white striped blanket, a tiny hat covering his dark hair. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, they reported. 21 inches. Perfect APGAR scores. This is one healthy baby. "Do we have a name?" the nurse asked, pen poised over paperwork. I looked at Lorenzo, seeing the hope and question in his eyes. We'd never discussed this. I told him weeks ago that I was keeping the name private, that it was mine to hold until the baby arrived. "Matteo," I said softly. "Matteo James Vitali." Lorenzo's eyes widened. "James, that's your father's name." I nodded. "And Matteo because it means gift of God, which he is, despite everything, despite all the ways his arrival was unexpected and complicated. He's still a gift." "It's perfect," Lorenzo said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's perfect. You're—" He stopped, seeming to realize he was about to cross a line. "You did so well, Elena. You were incredible." The next few hours passed in a haze of exhaustion and awe. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, teaching me about breastfeeding, explaining postpartum care. Lorenzo stayed the entire time, making himself useful in small ways, adjusting pillows, fetching water, holding Matteo while I used the bathroom on wobbly legs. He'd changed, I realized, watching him cradle our son with unexpected competence. The man who'd once been too important to take my call was now sitting in an uncomfortable hospital chair, cooing at our baby in melodic Italian, completely absorbed in this tiny person who didn't care about business empires or power dynamics. "He has your eyes," I observed, watching Matteo blink up at Lorenzo with unfocused newborn awareness. "And your nose," Lorenzo countered. "And hopefully your kindness, your patience, your strength." Lorenzo. I know, he said quickly. I know you don't want to hear this. But Elena, watching you bring him into the world, seeing the way you look at him. He paused, seeming to struggle for words. I understand now why you couldn't come back, why the marriage couldn't survive. You deserved this version of me all along. The one who shows up, who stays, who thinks you're the most important person in the room. You're being this version for him, I said, nodding toward Matteo. That's what matters. I'm being this version because of you, he corrected. Because you taught me what it costs when I'm not. Because you loved me enough to leave when I wasn't being the man I should have been. I didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know if it was possible to separate the man he was becoming from the wreckage of what we'd been. Sophia arrived around noon, bursting into the room with flowers and tears and exclamations in rapid Italian that made Lorenzo laugh. She held Matteo like he was made of glass, cooing over his perfect features, then fixing me with a knowing look. He's been here the whole time? She asked in English, nodding toward Lorenzo. He was here for the birth, I confirmed. He's been helpful. Sophia studied Lorenzo with the assessing eye of a protective best friend. See that you continue being helpful. Midnight diaper changes, 3 a.m. feedings, all of it. I will, Lorenzo promised. Whatever Elena needs, whatever Matteo needs. Not just when it's convenient, Sophia pressed. Not just until the novelty wears off. Children need consistent presence, not dramatic gestures. I understand, Lorenzo said seriously. I'm not going anywhere. After Sophia left, promising to bring proper Italian food later because hospital food is an insult, Lorenzo and I sat in quiet companionship, taking turns holding Matteo, marveling at how something so small could so completely rearrange the universe. I should go, Lorenzo said eventually, reluctance clear in his voice. Let you rest. I'll come back this evening? Actually, I said, surprising myself. Could you stay a little longer, just until he falls asleep? He seems calmer when you hold him. Lorenzo's face transformed with joy so complete, it was almost painful to witness. I'd love to. Yes, of course. He settled back into the chair, Matteo cradled against his chest, and started singing softly in Italian. A lullaby I dimly remembered him mentioning once, something his mother used to sing. His voice was surprisingly good, melodic and gentle, and I watched our son's eyes gradually close, his tiny face relaxing into sleep against his father's heartbeat. I must have dozed off because I woke to find the room dim, late afternoon sun filtering through partially closed blinds. Lorenzo was still there, still holding Matteo, now talking quietly on his phone in Italian. Something about rescheduling meetings, working remotely, family priorities. When he noticed I was awake, he ended the call quickly. Sorry, I tried to be quiet. It's okay, I said, stretching carefully, feeling the soreness of childbirth in every muscle. What were you telling them? That I'll be working from home for the next 2 weeks, he said. That all meetings need to be rescheduled or conducted virtually. That my son was just born, and he's my priority right now. Lorenzo, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he interrupted firmly. Not because you're asking, because this is what fathers do. They show up, they prioritize, they make it clear that nothing is more important than their family. We're not. I stopped, correcting myself. You and I aren't a family anymore. Not in that way. No, he agreed. But Matteo and I are family. And you and Matteo are family. And that makes us... He paused, searching for the right word. Connected. Permanently and irrevocably connected. It wasn't the declaration of love I might have wanted years ago. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation or renewed romance. But it was something perhaps more valuable. a promise of presence, of co-parenting, of showing up not just during the dramatic moments, but through all the mundane, exhausting days that make up a life. Connected, I repeated, testing the word. I can work with connected. Over the following weeks, Lorenzo proved himself in ways I hadn't expected. He came by the apartment daily, not to pressure or plead, but to help, to hold Mateo while I showered, to change diapers and learn the intricacies of swaddling, to sit quietly while I struggled through the painful early days of breastfeeding, offering water and encouragement without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. He brought food from his mother, who'd apparently decided that my refusal to reunite with her son didn't negate her claim on her grandson. He assembled the baby swing I'd been putting off. He did middle-of-the-night formula runs when I was too exhausted to leave the apartment. And he never once asked me to reconsider our separation. 6 weeks postpartum, sitting on my couch while Mateo slept in his bassinet, I finally addressed the elephant that had been living in my apartment since the night he was born. "You've kept your promise," I said, "about showing up, about being present." Lorenzo looked up from his phone where he'd been researching developmental milestones. "Of course, I told you I would." "You did," I acknowledged, "and I appreciate it, more than I can articulate. But Lorenzo, we need to talk about long-term arrangements, custody schedules, your place in Mateo's life as he grows." Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, quickly suppressed. "What are you suggesting?" "Joint custody," I said. "Equal time, equal input on major decisions. He should know both of us, spend real time with both of us. Not just visits, but actual living time." "And us?" Lorenzo asked quietly. "What about us?" I looked at him sitting in my living room. This man I'd married and left. This man who'd finally learned too late what I'd needed all along. "There is no us," I said gently. "Not romantically, not as a couple. But Lorenzo, there's something else. Something maybe better. I don't understand." "We can be partners," I explained. "Co-parents who respect each other, who communicate well, who put Mateo first. We can be friends eventually if we work at it. We can build something new instead of trying to resuscitate what died." "You're saying it's really over," he said, not as a question but as an acceptance. "That no matter how much I change, no matter how present I am, you'll never—" "I'm saying that I've grieved what we were," I interrupted. "I've mourned it and let it go. And I can't go back to that, Lorenzo. I can't risk losing myself again." He was quiet for a long moment, watching Mateo sleep with an expression that was equal parts love and loss. "You're right," he said finally. "About all of it. I'd hoped that maybe, with time." "Hope for a good partnership instead," I suggested. "Hope for a friendship built on mutual respect. Hope for raising a son who sees his parents treating each other with kindness, even when they're not together." "That's not nothing," he acknowledged. "It's everything that matters," I corrected. As Lorenzo prepared to leave that evening, he stopped at the door, Mateo asleep against his shoulder in that way that only babies can sleep, completely surrendered, totally trusting. "Elena," he said softly, "I want you to know. I'm grateful for this, for the chance to be his father, for not shutting me out completely. I know I didn't earn it." "You're earning it now," I said. "Every day. That's what counts." He nodded once and carefully transferred Mateo to his bassinet with the competence of someone who'd been practicing, who'd watched the YouTube videos and read the books, and genuinely wanted to be good at this. "Wednesday call?" he asked, maintaining our routine. "Wednesday call," I confirmed. After he left, I stood at the window watching the street below, watching Lorenzo pause beside his car to look up at my apartment before driving away. He'd changed. Undeniably, genuinely changed. But some breaks couldn't be mended, some relationships couldn't be resurrected. The woman who'd loved Lorenzo Vitali had been broken on a Manhattan street 6 months ago, and the woman who'd risen from that wreckage knew her worth too well to settle for crumbs ever again. Instead, we'd build something different, something harder but healthier, something that acknowledged the past without being enslaved to it. I returned to Matteo's bassinet, watching him sleep with that intense newborn focus that made every breath seem miraculous. He would grow up knowing his father, would spend weekends in Lorenzo's home and weekdays in mine, would learn about relationships from parents who respected each other enough to prioritize his needs above their own histories. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd imagined at that gallery opening 4 years ago, when a handsome stranger with questionable fashion taste had made me laugh. But fairy tales, I'd learned, were overrated anyway. This honest, complicated, carefully negotiated piece was real. And real, I was discovering, was enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Lorenzo. He smiled at me tonight. A real smile. I got it on video. Sending now. I watched the clip. Lorenzo's face hovering over Matteo's. The pure joy in his expression when our son's lips curved upward. A real smile or gas, it didn't matter. What mattered was the father who was present to see it, to document it, to share it. I sent back a simple response. He loves you. Lorenzo's reply came immediately. Learning to deserve that. Every day, learning. And somehow, impossibly, that was all I needed to hear.